Hi, welcome back to Fastball Profits. My name is Rob Skuderick. This is Ryan. Thanks for joining us today. This is our first start sit video. I'm getting really excited. We're a week away from the start of the season, actually less than a week away. Now, for a lot of you guys out there, I hope you had a great draft, maybe been working the waiver wire, but that's only half the battle. Here's where you really begin to win and lose games is playing the right guys. Nothing more frustrating in fantasy football to lose a game when you leave points on your bench. So the key is getting the right guys in your lineup. So this is our start sit video. We do it every Tuesday. We talk about every game in the NFL and talk about any relevant players in fantasy that you need to know in terms of starting. Now, one of the things that we always say, and this is so important, you need to contextualize this information for your league. And what I mean by that is we're giving you some basic guidelines, but I don't understand your bench size. I don't understand your waiver wire availability, your scoring system, things like that. So when we say sit a guy, they may not mean that you need to sit him. It could be that you just need to lower your expectations. We use, for an example, let's say Doug Baldwin. Let's say Doug Baldwin's playing the Vikings at Xavier Rhodes. Typically, Xavier Rhodes would shut down opposing teams' number one wideout. But let's say your backup wide receiver is Deshaun Jackson, which we anticipate is not going to have a great year this year. I would probably still play Baldwin, but what you need to do is instead of seeing him as a wide receiver 1 or 2, he's going to fall down to maybe a wide receiver 3. You got to lower your expectations. I think another thing that we talked about, Ryan, even before we did the video here, is that week 1 yet, we haven't started, so we don't have a lot of information. We don't have trends, injury reports. You hear coach speak, a guy says his player's going to get X amount of touches. Is he going to do that? He's going to follow through his promise. So right now we're limited on information. We'll have you a lot more. I have a personal conviction that I really feel like it takes 2 to 3 weeks into the regular season before you can see trends that are not anomalies, trends, offensive, defensive rankings that you can trust. More and more, there's parity in the NFL, which I think is good. But what that parity means is that small changes cause major fluctuations from year to year in a short period of time. They make it harder to trust the strength of schedule. I'll give you an example. I use the Rams. In 2016, the Rams had the worst offense in the NFL, allowing their scoring 14 points per game. 1 year later, 2017, they were number 1 in the NFL in 29.9 points scored per game. And so even though we're going to look at strength of schedule, we're going to talk about some of these matchups, I really feel like week 2 to 3 is when we can really begin to tell what we can trust out there as far as trends. One final thing before we actually get into the video. If you have specific questions about start sit, if you put it in the comment section on the video, we do our best to answer them for you guys, okay? We try to get to you guys, not only answer for it, but we try to give you an in-depth answer as to why we would start this guy or not that guy and the reasoning behind it. But we will say this, last year we had a few videos actually, where we got a few hundred questions. Now, if that happens, it makes it difficult to get to all those. So what we do is if you're a Patreon customer and you can subscribe to Patreon, we give you preference. We're going to make sure to answer your questions first before anybody else's. And if there's a guy in the video that we don't mention, if there's a guy that we don't talk about, then you can probably assume that he's a guy you need to sit. So we're talking about relevant guys. So here we go. First start sit video of 2018. We're excited. Let's get to the first team here. So Ryan, you're up for the Eagles and Falcons.
All right, Eagles and Falcons. Before we get to this game, I do want to mention one thing. In the last couple of days here, I had some technical difficulties with ESPN, but I finally got everything established. We are going to do a pigskin pick'em and an eliminator challenge on ESPN. For those of you who've done it before, the eliminator challenge, pick one team each week that'll win the game, and you can no longer pick that team for the rest of the season. So around weeks 9, 10, 11, it starts to get more challenging. Definitely weeks 15, 16. And towards the end of the season, when there's the last man standing, it's kind of a knockout pool type of thing. We're going to try and find a winner there. And pigskin pick'em, you just pick the winners each week. Gives you an overall record. You kind of see where you're sitting with everybody else. So what you want to do, excuse me, you want to go to ESPN.com under the tab Fantasy and Games. You can go to pigskin pick'em, join a group, and look up Fantasy Profits. Also under Eliminator Challenge, join a group, and it is under Fantasy Profits. I think at the moment, I'm the only one that's on there. Rob, you haven't been able to get in. There are some difficulties with ESPN, but I did post it on Facebook. I did post it on Twitter. If you check out our Twitter at VFF Profits, we're on there too, so keep checking that out. And we're going to get into the first game. We have the Philadelphia Eagles at home against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, when it comes to quarterbacks, a lot of people are looking at the whole Nick Foles, Carson Wentz situation. I do not think that Carson Wentz and Nick Foles are on the same level. So we're gonna have to start. We're gonna have to sit Nick Foles this week. It's not just as simple as popping a guy in. Yeah, he did play well down the stretch. The last couple of weeks of the regular season last year, he wasn't so great, but in the playoffs, he did absolutely amazing, and he put up huge numbers in the Super Bowl as an MVP. However, this season is a completely different year. Like Rob mentioned, things can change from the drop of a dime, and that offense is kind of looking like they're having that Super Bowl hangover. So right now I have Nick Foles as a sit. He's outside my top 16. So even in 16-team leagues, I do not have Nick Foles as a starter. Quarterback Matt Ryan, however, for the Atlanta Falcons, I think this is going to be an increase for him this year. He's gonna have a bit of a bounce back season with Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, and all those options. So Matt Ryan, he's on the lower end quarterback one range. I'm sure some of you are gonna have better options out there, but he's around the low end quarterback one, maybe around the 16 range if you have a deeper league. Now, when we look at the running backs, the situation, Jay Ajayi has a little bit of a foot issue, but the Philadelphia Eagles' offensive line is ranked in the top 3 in all aspects. So you're going to have to start Jay Ajayi. He's probably going to be in the RB2 range for most leagues, but he is somebody you're probably going to be starting this week, and I don't know if you have any better options. Corey Clement is a sit for me this week. And on the Falcons side, I would go with Devontae Freeman, definitely a start. Tevin Coleman in PPR leagues, he's probably an RB3 or a flex consideration, right around the 25 to 30 range in PPR. But in standard leagues, he's not going to be somebody that you're going to be looking at starting. Now on to the wide receivers. Wide receivers, we have a bit of a banged up situation there for the Eagles as well. Mac Hollins is out with that groin injury. Alshon Jeffrey still suffering that shoulder injury. They say it's going to be week to week. So Nelson Aguilar might be the only option there, but I see him as a wide receiver 3 this week in all leagues. So I don't really know. I mean, you could find some better options out there. If he's on your team, you're probably going to have to start him if you drafted him anywhere decent in the high range there. So he's probably a wide receiver 3 for me this week. And absolute ceiling is probably wide receiver 2 because I don't foresee that offense having a very great week. Other than that, Mike Wallace is going to be a sit for me this week. And on to the Atlanta Falcons, Julio Jones, absolutely start him. He's one of those must starts. He's matchup proof. Actually, in the playoff game against the Eagles last year, he was the only receiver in the entire game that had over 100 yards. He had 101 against the Eagles in that playoff game in January. So he's going to be a start for me. Calvin Ridley's a guy that we're going to have to watch. I don't really know what he's going to be able to do once he gets in that NFL action where the games actually start to mean something. So we'll keep an eye on Calvin Ridley. Mohamed Sanu is outside my wide receiver 3 range. He's going to be a sit for me this week. And on to the defense. The Philadelphia Eagles defense has been a stellar defense. However, this week with a pretty powerful offense in the Atlanta Falcons, I have the Eagles defense as my ranked number 12 defense. So like Rob said, you need to contextualize that into the size of your draft, the size of your league, and in 12-team leagues, they're just on the fringe. They could get bounced out. 16-team leagues, they're definitely a start for me this week, but in 10-team leagues, I would not start the defense. And the Atlanta Falcons, Christian had some great stats on the Falcons defense last year. We had a graph on a couple of our videos. They were actually the number 5 defense as far as NFL goes, but in fantasy, they were number 25. Now, touchdowns are fluky for defense and special teams, so that could change very, very quickly. All it takes is a couple of touchdowns, and they move easily into the top 12. So the Falcons defense is right on the fringe for me. You probably have a better option. You didn't draft them very high, so you're probably sitting the Falcons defense this week. And both of these kickers are actually good offense. You have Jake Elliott and Matt Bryant there, so they're probably going to be starts for me. Kickers are, if they're on your team, you should probably only have one kicker, and if they're on your team, you're starting them this week.
All right. Agree with that. Let's move on to the next game. So we got Pittsburgh versus the Browns here. So let's start with quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger, he's a solid play. He's got great weapons around him. Now, Le'Veon Bell hasn't reported yet. He should report. That's what everybody speculates, like last year. He won't be at the top of his game, but he's still a very solid option there. You got Antonio Brown, James Washington, Juju Smith-Schuster. New offensive coordinator that says he's going to open things up there. So Ben Roethlisberger is a good start this week. And then Tyrod Taylor, I want to talk about him briefly. If you're in deeper leagues or leagues where you have to start two quarterbacks, or if you're looking for a daily fantasy option, I think he's worth a flyer. One, he'll come really cheap for you if you're in daily fantasy. Now, he's playing Pittsburgh. That defense last year, if you look at after week 10, they were brutal. They allowed 16.5 points per game through the first 10 games, but then the last 7, they allowed 26.9, and they've also struggled a little bit in the preseason. Now, we assume Ben Roethlisberger in that offense will put points on the board. That'll force Tyrod Taylor to have to play catch up and throw the ball a lot. And I think Tyrod Taylor's had his best weapons he's ever had in his entire career. Josh Gordon's there, though. Sounds like he won't start, but he definitely will play. Of course, you've got Jarvis Landry, David Njoku, Callaway, Duke Johnson. So I think Tyrod Taylor's a sneaky play. He's not my top 15, but he's a guy that, like I said, if you're in you have to start two quarterbacks, or if you're looking at a daily option, you could consider him. Le'Veon Bell, last year we mentioned that he started slow. First 2 games, he had a 3.2 yards per carry. Also, he hasn't been around. They got a new offensive coordinator, so I'm sure he's behind on some of the offense and the nuances, some of the changes that they might have made to that playbook. So I think that's going to hurt him a little bit. With that said, if he reports, he's very hard to sit. And so I look him as a back-end running back 2 this week and a front-end running back 2 in PPR leagues. I expect him to get around 10 to 12 carries, maybe 5 to 7 targets in the passing game until he gets back into shape. And the reason why is we got James Conner there, who has actually played fairly well. So look at James Conner there. Most likely, he'll see increased play this week. Even if Le'Veon Bell is back, I think he's going to see a few more carries simply as they're going to want to work Bell back in slowly because Bell's not going to be in playing shape yet. I can't trust Conner enough that he's going to get enough touches if Bell is back there to really trust him as a start at this point. So I like James Conner for next year. I like him for Dynasty Leagues. I don't like him for this week unless Bell doesn't show up. If Bell doesn't report to camp, then Conner is an automatic RB2 with big upside. Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson, a stud in the passing game. This guy is great hands for a running back. He's what I would call a flex play or running back 3 in leagues over 10 teams in size that are larger, and it has to be in a PPR league. If it's in a standard league, I would sit Duke Johnson. Carlos Hyde ran real strong in the preseason. He looked good. Now, last season, he began to show he had decent hands in the passing game. I think he had over 50 catches. I look at Carlos Hyde as a running back 2/3, depending on your league size, but he's definitely a guy that I would start at this point. It's definitely someone you should consider. Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb will get some carries in this game. He ran hot or cold in the preseason. At times he looked really good, other times he looked bad. If you're in a dynasty league, he has some appeal, but I see more as a bench stash. I would not start him week 1. Let's get to the wide receivers. So Antonio Brown, he returned to practice after missing time in the preseason because of injury. I can give you stats and numbers as why you should start this guy, but if you need to know you should start Antonio Brown, then you probably shouldn't be playing fantasy. He's a no-brainer, start Antonio Brown. Juju Smith-Schuster. He looked great last year. He looked great in the preseason. Yes, he's behind Brown as far as targets goes, but he's a must-start wide receiver too. I love Juju Smith-Schuster all year long. James Washington. A lot of talk about him being a sleeper, and I think he's got options out there, although he did leave last preseason game, the 3rd preseason game, with an abdominal injury. Sounds like he is healthy. Doesn't matter. For me, he's a deep bench stash with upside, but not somebody I'm going to play right now. You got to sit Washington. Josh Gordon, he's another guy that he practiced this week. He's going to play in the game, but he's not going to get started there. So what is this going to look like? How many targets is he going to get? We don't know. He's another guy that is going to be rusty, yet he's got a lot of talent. With that said, I think it takes a little bit of time for a wide receiver and quarterback to build rapport and get that timing down. And so I would start Josh Gordon as a wide receiver 3 in leagues that are 12-team or larger. Obviously, after week 1, his value is going to go up. He's going to definitely move into that tier 1 range. But until we see him out there, until he builds on that timing, until he has a game shape, he's a wide receiver 3 for me. And then there's Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry is a PPR stud, averaging 105 catches the last 3 years. He's a wide receiver 1 in PPR leagues, and in standard leagues, he's a wide receiver 2 this week. I would sit all other wide receivers out there. Go to tight ends. You got David Njoku. He's a very young, talented tight end. He's got great skills. Many viewed him as a project come out of college, but he showed good rapport with Taylor and Mayfield. Actually had one game in the preseason where he had 2 touchdowns. I think he's worth a start in deeper leagues. And when I say deeper leagues, that's 10 teams or larger. I would start David Njoku. And then you got Vance McDonald, Jesse James, other tight ends for Cleveland. None of them are getting a decent amount of points. Well, let's look at tight ends for, playing Cleveland. Last year, the Browns did give up a number of points to tight ends. With that said, I think there's just too many mouths to feed in that Pittsburgh offense. There's no clear leader in tight end targets. These men may have value later on in the year. With injuries, they may become a bye-week replacement. But right now, I would sit Vance McDonald, Jesse James, and all those guys. As far as kickers go, I'd start Chris Boswell. And then Zane Gonzalez is bottom third of kickers. He's outside the top 20, so we'd advise sitting him. Now, as far as the Steelers defense goes, it's not a great play. It's not like the Steelers playing last year, the year before. If they played Cleveland, you say it's automatic start, it's great. I think they're a mid-range play. I think the Steelers are outside of the top 10 as far as rankings this week. Not bad play, not a great play though. They got some things to work out there, and I would sit the Browns defense at this point. They're playing Ben Roethlisberger, who's probably not going to turn the ball over a lot. So let's get to our next game. Looks like you're up again with the Bengals and the Colts.
All right, on to the Bengals at the Colts. So let's start with quarterbacks. We have Andrew Luck coming back for his first meaningful game here in over a year and a half. I have Andrew Luck. He had a little bit of a foot issue there. I have Andrew Luck outside my top 10 for quarterbacks. Although in deeper leagues, 12-team, 14, 16-team leagues, even 2 quarterback leagues, I do have him as a start. But 10-team leagues is the only type of league I do not have either Dalton or Andrew Luck as a start. So in 10-team leagues, I'm sitting both of these guys. But in anything bigger than a 10-team league, I'm actually going to start both of them. Andy Dalton is a sneaky DFS play this week, too, if you want to stack him with A.J. Green. Actually, that Colts defense is brutal. And if you watched any of the preseason, whether it was the starters or the bench, the second, third string, they were just giving up points left and right. So I do have Andy Dalton as a starter, and I do also have Andrew Luck as a starter this week in any team outside of 10-team leagues. Now, on to the running backs. Joe Mixon for the Cincinnati Bengals is absolutely going to be a stud this week. I feel like he is going to be a low-end RB1, high-end RB2, especially in PPR leagues. He's going to catch a lot of balls. Gio Bernard is the type of guy that's going to be a pass catcher on third downs too, but Mixon can do it. He actually led the FBS in receptions in 2016, so he's got the hands to do it. And if Gio Bernard doesn't need to be on the field, they're gonna use Mixon as much as they can. And I think game script is probably gonna turn into a shootout, so Dalton will still be passing the ball, and Mixon will be a guy that can catch those. Gio Bernard, I don't foresee him as a starter. We're gonna sit him this week. And until Joe Mixon, if anything happens with him, if he gets injured or suspended or anything like that, then we might look at Gio Bernard. But until that time comes, I think it's just Mixon that we're going to be working on here with the Bengals. As far as the Colts, it's kind of an interesting backfield there. Christine Michael had a pretty good preseason. They worked him a lot. Robert Turbin is suspended for 4 games, so they won't have him. It basically comes down to we got Marlon Mack coming back off that shoulder injury. We have Nyheim Hines, and we have Jordan Wilkins. And at this point, until we kind of figure out, like you said, 2 or 3 weeks there, Rob, until we figure out what they're going to do, what the game script is going to look like, we don't know which running back it's going to be. So I would actually sit all of these guys, and the best option you might have is Marlon Mack as a low-end RB3 this week, somewhere in the 30 to 36 range. In 12-team leagues, he'd be an RB3. So unless you're looking at like a 16-team league where you start 2 running backs and a flex, or even 3 running backs, I don't think that any of the Colts backfield is somebody you're going to want to look at this week. However, the wide receiver is T.Y. Hilton. I do have him as a wide receiver 1 on the low end and high end wide receiver 2. He is Andrew Luck's safety blanket. He does love to go to T.Y. Hilton. 4 of his 9 attempts in the first game he came back, he actually threw to T.Y. Hilton, and that's basically the only option we have for wide receivers on the Colts. Ryan Grant is there. I'd love to see what he's going to be able to do this year. Had 4 years, never missed a game with the Redskins, but didn't really do a whole lot with them. So now, as playing a bigger role on a different team, I'm going to watch Ryan Grant, but he's going to be a sit for me this week. The only wide receiver I'm looking at is T.Y. Hilton in any type of fantasy leagues. And for the Bengals, also, A.J. Green's the only wide receiver I really want there. He's actually a top 5 wide receiver for me this week, and I would love to play him in daily. PPR stud, touchdown monster, and that Colts defense, like I said, is brutal right now. So A.J. Green's definitely a start for me. John Ross is another one of those guys we have to wait and see. I think just by getting out there on the first play of the game, he's going to already have more fantasy points than he did last year, because he finished the year with negative points last year. But Tyler Boyd is another interesting guy to look at in the future. But as for now, we're sitting John Ross and we're sitting Tyler Boyd, and we're only starting A.J. Green from the Bengals wide receivers. And if you're looking at the tight ends, we have Tyler Eifert, Tyler Kroft, Now, Marv Lewis has come out publicly and said that he does not want Tyler Eifert to have to play more than 50 snaps in a game. However, you can't deny the talent and the ability and the rapport he has with Andy Dalton with .86 touchdowns per game in the games he's been healthy. Now, that's the key, is the games he's been healthy. He does get injured a lot. He has missed over half the games since he's been in the NFL. But if he is out there and he's on the field, he's got a nose for the end zone. So I'd say anything outside of a 12-team league, you're starting him. But 12 teams, 10-team leagues, 8-team leagues, I would not start Tyler Eifert. But I think I have him right around number 14 as far as my tight ends go this week. So 14, 16-team leagues, or even tight end premium or 2 tight end leagues, you want to be starting Tyler Eifert this week. And Jack Doyle, the thing with Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron is by having both of those guys out there, they actually lower each other's value. If it was just one of them, I think that they would increase the value for both of them, because Andrew Luck does love to go to his tight ends. He's actually second behind only Tom Brady from 2014 to 2016 in passing touchdowns to the tight end and receptions. So he loves to go to the tight end, but the question is, which one is it going to be? Is it going to be both? It's one of those situations like we have in Tampa Bay where it's tight end by committee, as we've been calling it, and I think they lower each other's value. The only one I'm starting this week would be Jack Doyle. That'd be in maybe a 12-team PPR league, but anything 10-team league or smaller, I'm not starting any Indianapolis tight end. When it comes to the defenses on both of these teams aren't great at the moment. I'm probably sitting both of those guys. And the kicker, if you drafted a kicker, like I said in the last game, if you drafted Vinatieri, you're probably going to start him. Other than that, you're not looking at the kickers in this game. So that's what I have here. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Rob?
No, I think I agree with you there. Let's get to the next game.
Sure.
So we're looking at the Titans versus the Dolphins. So I'll start there with Marcus Mariota. Looks like his leg is healed and healthy. He's quick again. You look at Corey Davis is healthy, and they brought in Dion Lewis, who is a great pass-catching back. Last year, he led all running backs in pass-catching percentage. And then you look at Tyrod Taylor, an upcoming talent, Rashard Matthews. So there's definitely weapons there. But for me, he's not a top 12 rank. I need to see some on-field performance. I need to make sure everything's grooving there once again. So I need to see that. I would sit him unless you're in leagues that start 2 quarterbacks, or in a league over 12 teams. That's where I have Marcus Mariota ranked. Ryan Tannehill, I'd sit him. He's recovered from injury. His weapons around him are below average at this point. I won't even bother with him. So we get Derrick Henry in this one. We give a big preseason breakdown on why we said he's going to disappoint this year for the sake of time. I'm not going to get into all that. You have to watch another video if you want to know why. He struggled in the preseason. So for me, he's a running back 3 in standards and running back 4 in PPRs, and that's generous. I've got some major concerns for Derrick Henry. Dion Lewis. He's going to have a big PPR season this year. This guy is going to surprise a lot of people. So for me, he's a running back 2 in PPR leagues, and in standard leagues, I see Dion Lewis as a running back 3 in that one. Kalen Ballage, you need to sit him. He didn't impress in the preseason. He had fumble issues, missed assignments. He was outplayed by Drake. I would sit Kalen Ballage. He's nothing more than a bench stash in dynasty leagues. Frank Gore, I know he's going to get some carries. I love the guy. He's been around for a while. He's 35 years old, but I'm going to sit him. I'm not going to risk it. And then Kenyon Drake, I love this guy. He looked great last year during 4 games. He looked good in the preseason. He impressed the coaches. Even Gore came out and said publicly, this guy's very talented. Coach Adam Gase said that hopefully Kenyon Drake will handle 15 to 20 carries a game and see 6 to 8 targets a game. That was a couple days ago on Yahoo Sports. So I see Kenyon Drake as a solid running back too. I do think the first couple weeks he will lose some carries to Gore, but I think ultimately his performance, he's going to be a much better running back, and eventually he'll get a majority of those carries. Looking at wide receivers, I got Corey Davis out there. He's a former first-round pick. I think he's poised for a breakout year. Although there's a lot of question marks there before we fully trust him. One, he's going to face a decent cornerback there. So this week, I see Corey Davis as a wide receiver 2 in 12-team leagues or bigger. And even that's, you know what, even as I look at valuation, honestly, I might actually call him more of a wide receiver 3, honestly. Like I said, I think he's up for a big year, but I'd like to see him do a few things week 1 before I can trust him. Rashard Matthews, well, he missed all OTAs and training camp. He recovered from off-season surgery to repair a meniscus injury. Just got activated. But I'd rather stay away from him. I got him as a wide receiver 4 or 5. I know that a lot of people like him. He'll be a volume play. But like anything, you got to be on the field. You got to build time with your quarterback. I would like to stay away from him week 1. You got Tyrod Taylor in this game. Tyrod Taylor has got a lot of potential, but you don't start potential. You sit and see what he does. Devontae Parker, you got to sit him. He's battling injuries. He couldn't get separation and stuff. His value is dropping. This is a guy people thought was going to be huge. I would sit him. Kenny Stills on that team really currently stands as a team's number one wide receiver. So for me, he's worth a start as a wide receiver 3 in decent sized leagues. Danny Amendola, slot receiver. I think he's got PPR value, but I still suggest that this week 1 I would sit Danny Amendola. Look at Delaney Walker. Delaney Walker had an injury, but he's coming out and said publicly that he said he will play. He'll be ready week 1. If he does play, he's not a top 5 tight end, but if he does play, he's a tight end I think you could put in the top 10 and start him. He's a back end, what do you call it, tight end 1. And then you got Juno Smith. You're going to sit him. The only way you're going to start him is if Walker sits. So watch the injury report at the end of this week, see how he does. But even Jono Smith, even if he does play and Walker sits, to me, he's a tight end that still ranks between 15 to 18. Probably not worth it. Then Mike Gesicki. A lot of people love this guy. This guy's a rookie phenom. He got huge upside. But we did a video that talked about statistically and historically, rookie tight ends have very fantasy impact. And so with everything that's stacked against him right now, I like the guy. I think he's got potential, but I would sit him week 1. As far as kickers go, outside Ryan Suckup, I would sit Jason Sanders. I would start Miami's defense. I'm sorry, I take that back. I would sit Miami's defense. But I would say Tennessee is an underrated fantasy defense. Last year they did actually quite well. I would start them. I think their defense I see between the 10 to 12 range of this week. So that's kind of my breakdown of that game there, Ryan.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Let's get to our next game. So Ryan, looks like you're up for my Vikings, my hometown Vikes. What do you think about that game?
Oh, you're absolutely going to love this. Well, I'm going to start out by saying we're starting all of our Vikings this week. So we're going to start off with the quarterback, Kirk Cousins. Definitely starting Kirk Cousins. The problem is the San Francisco defense. Realistically, they can't get any pressure on the quarterback. Their linebackers are spotty at best. And the best thing they did all offseason was bring in Richard Sherman, who's coming off of an Achilles injury. And he's really lost a step as far as what everybody's been saying. So that 49ers defense is actually looking to be like it could be one of the worst in the NFC. So we're definitely going to go start all of our Vikings. But let's just run down the list real quick. Kirk Cousins, I have him as a top 10 quarterback for this week. Outside my top 5, but inside my top 10. And we're going to pop over to the San Francisco 49ers and Jimmy Garoppolo. He's playing one of the absolute best defenses in the NFL. Now, the Vikings did lose Terrence Newman to retirement, which is unfortunate. He was a great player for them for many years, playing with the Bengals prior to that. The thing I heard was that he might have missed making the team, and they just kind of gave him the news and let him retire instead. 40-year-old quarterback turned safety. But that Vikings defense is still absolutely stellar on all levels. Their front seven, their secondary, they know exactly what they're doing. And I do not foresee Jimmy Garoppolo having the type of game that everybody's expecting him to have, or the type of game that he finished off last season with. He's actually outside my top 10, outside my top 12, and I believe I have him right around the 18 range. So like you've mentioned before, 2 quarterback leagues, he'd be a starter. But anything 10, 12, 14, 16 team leagues, we're not starting Garoppolo. Onto the running backs, Dalvin Cook, he's absolutely going to be a start. I think game flow and game script, he's going to have an absolute monster game. Like I said, they can't get pressure. They don't have good linebackers. He's going to get break into the secondary quite a bit, I think. And the Vikings are going to jump out to an early lead, and it's just going to be pound the ball with Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray. Murray, unfortunately, I don't feel is going to be a start option this week. But keep an eye. If anything does happen to Dalvin Cook, Murray will be slotted right into an RB2 possibly for the foreseeable future. But as for now, it's Dalvin Cook's job, and that's the way it's going to be. And for the 49ers, we really don't know what's going on there. They came out today and officially named Matt Breida as their starter. Now, we talked about this before the video. That just means that he's going to start the first play of the first series. But they do have Alfred Morris there, and it looks like he's going to get the majority of the snaps over the course of the season. But these two guys are not guys that you're going to want to start against this tough Vikings defense this week. So we're going to sit them. And onto the wide receivers, definitely Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs. They're low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 range for both of these guys. And the Vikings are absolutely going to feast this year on the play action with Kirk Cousins and these two wide receivers. So we're starting both of those guys easily if you have them on your team. Onto the 49ers. Marquise Goodwin, Pierre Garcon, Trent Taylor, Dante Pettis.
Yep.
Bryce Petty. Marquise Goodwin and Pierre Garcon. I think the best option that they're going to have, I mean, they're going up against some stellar corners there. Xavier Rhodes, they like to say Rhodes closed because nobody just they can't get any yards against him. He breaks up the passes. He's knocking balls down. He's intercepting things left and right. But I think Marquise Goodwin could break out for maybe 1 or 2 catches that are going to get him some decent yards. I just don't foresee them being viable options as wide receivers this week. Maybe if you're desperate, you could go wide receiver 3 with Marquise Goodwin. I actually have him higher than Garcon in my personal rankings, but I'd say Garcon would be just outside the wide receiver 3 range in 12-team leagues, and Marquise Goodwin would be just inside that wide receiver 3 range. And George Kittle as tight end, he's still a little bit banged up. I do not want to start George Kittle this week. And we're definitely starting Kyle Rudolph. Like we said, all of our Vikings are being started this week. And especially moving on to the defense, the Vikings defense is going to be a top 5 defense almost every week for me this year. So I'm definitely starting that defense. The offensive line for San Francisco is decent, but they're going to have a hard time giving Jimmy Garoppolo a ton of time. And those corners are going to be shutting people down. So there's really not going to be anywhere to throw the ball, and it could cause a lot of turnovers for the Vikings this year. And the San Francisco defense, like I mentioned, is probably one of the worst in the NFC, so we're definitely not starting the San Francisco defense this year. And once again, like I mentioned with kickers, if you drafted these guys on your team, Daniel Carlson, I believe it's Phil Dawson still for the 49ers, you're going to be starting them. But like we just got done talking about, if you're looking for a backup kicker already at week 1, Rob said you probably had some problems in your draft and you need to figure something else out. So if you have the kickers, start the kickers. And that's all I have for the Vikings. I'm sure you like that.
Yeah, I like Goodwin. This year I think he's Jimmy's favorite target, but he's got a rough matchup. And I actually like Alfred Morris. We've talked about him for a couple weeks. Hopefully you listen to our advice. But against that Vikings defense, that's a tough draw week 1.
Yeah.
Let's get to our next game. Look at that, Texans versus the Patriots. Let's start with Deshaun Watson. He's been looking great. He's fully recovered from ACL. You need to start him, obviously. Then Tom Brady, great player, future Hall of Famer. He looked great in the preseason. Now he's going to miss Edelman a little bit, but he's still got a lot of weapons there. Start Tom Brady. You're going to be just fine. Last year, Houston's defense was last in the NFL in points allowed. They'll improve on that, but they're not a great defense. Running back Sony Michel, you need to sit him. He's banged up. He's missed time with injury. As a rookie, that means he's still behind the learning curve in terms of the playbook, things like that. Then you look at White. Now, White is what I call PPR. If you're in PPR leagues, White has value. In standard leagues, he has no value. In PPR leagues, I would say he's a running back 3 or a flex play in deeper leagues. When I say deeper leagues, 14 teams or bigger. Now, the reason why he's got some value is actually the first 4 weeks he'll see increased targets, so will Rex Burkhead, simply because after cuts, they only carry 3 wide receivers, and Edelman is suspended, as we mentioned previously. As far as Rex Burkhead goes, he's got good value in PPR leagues. I think he's lower in standards. Now, last year I had 7 TDs in 10 games. Actually, I had 6 and 6. If you look at that, he looked really good. But his size is not overly big. It has a lack of durability. And if you look at Bill Belichick, he loves to use many different players and packages. I think that limits his ceiling. So I think he's got more value as a football player and less as a fantasy. I look at him as a guy that his best plays in PPR leagues, and he's really kind of touchdown dependent. If you look at last year, he only had 1 game last year. He had over 100 combined yards. In PPR leagues, I would definitely call him basically a running back 3. I know a lot of you have him ranked higher. I don't. That's where I have him. And then Jeremy Hill. Jeremy Hill, we said it for a long time. He ended up beating out Mike Gillislee for that job. He's going to be the guy that's going to pound the ball at the goal line between the tackles. I think he's touchdown dependent in standard leagues, though. He is somebody you could start. And he'll have a similar role to LeGarrette Blount a few years ago. Very, very low or no value in PPR leagues. But in standard leagues, Jeremy Hill could be a running back 3 for you. Lamar Miller, with Foreman still recovered from Achilles injury, this is Lamar Miller's going to get the ball a lot. He's going to see all 3 down action. He's going to get 80% of the carries there. And so I think you need to start him. He's a very solid running back to a volume play. He also lost some weight in the offseason, and it looks like he's a lot quicker than he was last year, but you need to play Lamar Miller. So let's go to the wide receivers in a game that could potentially be a high-scoring game here. We'll see. Now, these defenses struggled last year. Hopefully they'll improve. DeAndre Hopkins is a must-start wide receiver 1. Nothing to discuss there. Start him. Will Fuller is a wide receiver 3 who thrived last year with Hopkins. I'm sorry, not with Hopkins, but thrived with Watson when he was healthy. So he also had some bright moments as a rookie there. So I would start Will Fuller as a wide receiver 3. I'd sit all other Texan wide receivers. For the Patriots there, Chris Hogan, he's a must start as a wide receiver 2, especially with the lack of wide receivers there. He's going to hit a huge play the first 4 weeks. In fact, what I would probably do if you own him is this guy's value is going to be huge after like week 2, 3, and 4. I'd probably think about trading him after week 3 or 4 because I think he's going to see a major decrease in his targets after that.
I've noticed I've been all in on Hogan this year in all my drafts, so I think that's what I'm going to plan on doing.
Yeah. So you get Philip Dorsett, Cordell Patterson. You got to keep an eye on them for sleeper potential, but they're wide receiver 5 or 6. They're not worth a start. Ignore them. Tight ends go. We got Ryan Griffin and Jordan Atkins. Neither have established themselves enough to really make viable tight end options. Week 1, I would sit them. Of course, you're going to start Rob Gronkowski. That's a no-brainer. Go ahead and start him. Steven Gostkowski, I would sit him. And the Houston kicker is not a great play, but he's a decent start. Not in the top 10, but I'd say that he's definitely somebody that you could, between maybe the 14 to 18 range there, you could play him. I would sit both defenses in this game. So
Absolutely.
So here you go, Ryan, with the Saints and Buccaneers.
Yeah, let's move on to the Buccaneers at the Saints, playing in the Dome. We'll start off with the quarterbacks. We're absolutely going to start Drew Brees this week. Buccaneers defense was one of the worst in the league last year. Although they made some improvements, we haven't seen it yet in real meaningful games. So we're going to start Drew Brees. I mean, the guy is absolutely ridiculous. He had 10 straight seasons with 30 touchdowns or more. And last year was just an anomaly because that running game was so good. So look to have Drew Brees get back to his normal form this year. But definitely he's going to start it off hot with this week 1 against the Buccaneers. For the Bucs, Jameis Winston obviously suspended for a few games. So we're looking at Ryan Fitzpatrick. And that's about it over there. I don't foresee Fitzpatrick doing much of anything. The Saints is one of those teams where, you talked about the Rams offense going from 14 points per game up to 29 in a season. Now the Saints is one of those defenses where they were giving up 30 points a game and then they dropped to 20 or so last year. So it's one of those things, and they have the shutdown corner there. So I would not start Fitzpatrick this week, but I'm definitely starting Drew Brees. And when it comes to the running backs, absolutely Alvin Kamara. I mean, you're starting him. PPR leagues especially, standard leagues of course. So that's a no-brainer right there. And his backup looks like you talked about him in the last game. Mike Gillislee is probably going to be the backup there if he can come in and learn the playbook quickly. They dropped Jonathan Williams, and Boston Scott's the only other option they have right there. But Gillislee could come in, and if he learns the playbook, he could vulture some touchdowns in the first couple weeks. But I would not start Gillislee this week. I'm only starting Kamara. When it comes to the Buccaneers, a lot of people were high on Ronald Jones. They had him way ahead of Peyton Barber, but as far as what happened in the preseason, he averaged about 1 yard per carry in the preseason, and Peyton Barber just stole the job. And so Peyton Barber, to me, this week is a running back 3 or possibly even a flex position in like a 12-team league. But I have him in the 25 to 30 range for running backs this week. He's not going to be a viable starter, running back 1 or 2 in anything less than like a 14 or 16-team league. So Peyton Barber would be one of the guys to look at there. Other than that, nobody on the running backs for the Bucs. Wide receivers, you're starting Mike Evans, definitely. He's wide receiver 2 for me this week. He does have a tough matchup, but they're going to absolutely feed him the ball as much as they possibly can. If they give him 20 targets, he's still going to catch 8 to 10 of those. So he's going to be able to do something with those. Big, tall frame, 6'5", and Mike Evans is a stud wide receiver in this league. Chris Godwin's a flyer that you might want to look at in the future, but until we really know what his role is going to be, I don't foresee starting him, not even a wide receiver 3 in 12-team leagues. He's outside there, sneaky DFS play, maybe as a sleeper, maybe a cheap play, but for this week in regular season long, we're not starting Godwin, Humphreys, or Deshaun Jackson. And when it comes to the Saints, Michael Thomas, definitely top 5 wide receiver this week. Like I said, the Buccaneers have a rough defense. They had some issues giving up points to wide receivers last year, and it's going to continue right away this week, or I'm sorry, this year, starting in week 1 with Michael Thomas. The wide receiver 2 is going to be an interesting thing. As of right now, Cameron Meredith is there. We have Ted Ginn, and one guy that I really like is Traquan Smith. So whoever emerges as the wide receiver 2, you want to take a look at later on in the season and for season long. But in week 1, I'm still going to be in wait-and-see mode to see what happens with that. So I'm not starting any other wide receiver for the Saints this week other than Michael Thomas. Tight ends, Benjamin Watson. He was one of those safety blankets for Drew Brees. in the last season that he was there, but he's outside my top 16 for tight ends this week, so I'm not starting Benjamin Watson. And Cameron Brate and OJ Howard. I do have OJ Howard ranked slightly ahead of Cameron Brate this week, but he's also only in 16-team leagues would I even consider him. I'm sure you have better options if you're in a league like that, so I'm probably not starting either of the tight ends for the Buccaneers this week. As far as defenses go, I have the Saints ranked as one of my top 5 defenses for the week, and the Buccaneers, I definitely am not starting the Buccaneers defense. And kickers, Will Lutz is a definite start, and Chandler Cannizzaro is a sit for me for the Buccaneers.
All right, that sounds good. So look at the Giants versus the Jaguars. Start with Eli Manning. I think he's going to improve offensive line, great weapons around him. I think he's going to rebound this year. But he plays the Jags, who was second best defense in the NFL last year, and scored the most fantasy points for defenses. And he had the second most sacks with 55. I like Eli to rebound this year, but I would not start in week 1. Definitely avoid that. Blake Bortles, one, he has struggled the last couple of years, and he struggled again in the preseason. Last year he did have a 4-game stretch where he looked really good, and that got people excited, thinking he's going to rebound. But I want to say this. Yeah, he looked good in the 4-game stretch, but it was against very bad pass defenses. Against Indy, he was 30th in points allowed, 28th in passing yards allowed. They did against Seattle, and Seattle at that point was missing Cam Chancellor, Sherman. They also did against Houston, who was last in the league in points allowed. And so he padded those numbers against some very bad defenses. Add the fact that weapons around him aren't very good and proven right now. I would sit Blake Bortles in this game unless you have to. Like I said, I know one guy out there. He's in a 16-team league, and you start 2 quarterbacks. Obviously, you're going to have to start a guy like Blake Bortles, but that is a very rare exception. As far as the running backs go, Saquon Barkley is healthy. You need to start him as a running back 1 this week. Then you got Wayne Gallman. I like Wayne Gallman, actually. He did well last year. He's got good hands. But unless Barkley is ineffective, not likely, or he gets hurt, Gallman is not worth a start. Leonard Fournette here. You need to start him as a running back 1. Last year, the Giants gave up 120 rushing yards per game. They did make some defensive changes, but you need to go with Leonard Fournette in that game. And you got TJ Yeldon. He's a running back 4 in PPR leagues. That's where he's at in standards. He really doesn't have any value. As far as wide receiver goes, Marquise Lee, like I said, is down out for the year. That makes Keelan Cole the number 1 wide receiver in that offense. As a team's number 1 wide receiver, I still want to see target distribution there. I really want to know, like, is he going to get a lot of the targets? Are they going to even out by 3-4 guys? I don't know. Because of that, because of the fact that I'm not a huge fan of Blake Bortles, I say he's a wide receiver 3 in very deep leagues. Okay, it's got to be deep league. You got Dede Westbrook and Moncrief. Both of those guys, I would sit and see what happens, find out who gets targets, what that's going to look like. If you had to pick one of those guys to start, for me it'd be Dede Westbrook, but I'm not excited about either one of those. Odell Beckham is a stud. Obviously going to start this guy, but he did miss time in the preseason, and time is important between a quarterback and a wide receiver. They could be a little bit rusty. Plus, he's a tough matchup against Ramsey in a very tough secondary. So for me, start Odell Beckham, but I actually have him as a wide receiver 2 this week. I know some of you are going to say, wait a second, Odell Beckham is a wide receiver 2. I do. You're still going to start the guy, obviously. Sterling Shepard is a very underrated number 1 wide receiver, but this is a tough matchup, so that leaves him as a wide receiver 3 or 4, depending on your league size. In other weeks, so I think he's going to have a good year. As far as tight ends go, you got Evan Ingram. Jacksonville does allow points to tight ends when it comes to fantasy. They are vulnerable in that area. So I think he's going to be a nice check down option for Eli Manning, especially when the Jags bring a lot of pressure, which we know they'll do that. I would start Evan Ingram. Then you got Austin Seferian-Jenkins. So last year the Giants were also vulnerable to tight ends, but you look at Austin here. One, he showed potential, but for the most part, he's actually underachieved. He's outside of my top 12. He's a bubble play if you're in, let's say, a very large 16-team league. Then you may consider starting him, but I prefer going a different route if you have options. As far as kickers go, Josh Lambo and Aldrick Rosas. I would actually consider starting both of those guys. Neither in the top 10, but they're both very solid plays. Lambo is a safer play. Now you look at Rosas. Rosas struggled last year, but in the preseason he's been very accurate. He's actually made some long field goals. So I actually like both kickers in this matchup here. I think it could be a lot of field goals. I would start the Jags defense, and you can start the Giants. They're a cheap play as a defense between the 12 or 16. They're kind of on the bubble there. I'm not a huge fan, but once again, I'm not a big fan of Blake Bortles. So to me, if you're in a daily fantasy championship, or not championship, but if you're in a daily fantasy league, you can get them pretty cheap. So that's where I would kind of start the Giants. So that's kind of my take on that game.
Sure.
That brings us to the Bills versus the Ravens.
Yeah, we have the Bills at the Ravens this week, and if you guys are still with us here, I know I'm kind of long-winded, but the Ravens are my lock of the week because, I mean, come on, it's the Bills. We have Nathan Peterman. It was named the starting quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. He had an absolutely horrible starting experience last year against the Chargers. He will see them in week 2 again this year, but as of now, there's something with Sean McDermott and just how he likes Nathan Peterman. They brought in Josh Allen as a high draft pick, but he just continuously wants to go to Peterman. So I am not starting the Bills quarterback this week. I actually have the Ravens defense as my number 1 defense overall, so not going to start them. Joe Flacco is actually an interesting play for me this week. I don't see him in anything other than maybe a 2 quarterback league or very, very far back end top in a 16 team league, right around the 16 range. But it's actually an interesting play. He kind of showed some resurgence there in the preseason, and he had some pretty good games. So we'll see what happens with Flacco this year. But I think he's still playing to keep his job when they know that they drafted Lamar Jackson. So Flacco to me is not going to be a start in anything bigger than like a 2 quarterback league or maybe on the fringe of a 16 team league. And Lamar Jackson is going to be a sit for sure this week. Until he gets a starting job, I don't think that we're going to be starting him in any type of leagues because he's not going to have any real value. They're only really going to toss him in for a couple plays in the playbook that they specifically set up for him. Although he did look really good in the preseason running the ball. And when it comes to running backs, Alex Collins, I do have him as an RB1 this week just because of game script and volume. He's absolutely going to be on the field for the majority of the game. He's going to get most of the carries, and the Bills defense, although they are not horrible, they are not the greatest either, and they're going to be behind early, so Collins is going to get a lot of the work. I have Collins as an RB1 this week in 12-team leagues. Buck Allen and Kenneth Dixon, we don't really have to worry about. We're not starting them this week until, maybe something happens to Collins or, if they start to switch things up and have to pass in a PPR league, you might look at Allen. As far as Buffalo Bills, LaShawn McCoy, he's still on the field right now. He's not on the commissioner's exempt list. He has been suspended. So based on volume alone and targets, LaShawn McCoy is a running back 2 for me this week in PPR leagues and standards. So LaShawn McCoy, I'm starting. Chris Ivory, I'm not starting this week at all. And we'll see what happens there in the future with that backfield. As far as wide receivers go with the Buffalo Bills, Calvin Benjamin, I do not have him as a start this week, although he is the number 1 receiver and he should get some volume. That Ravens defense is absolutely stellar. They led the league last year in turnovers, so I do not want to go with any wide receivers against that defense. We have Zay Jones and Jeremy Curley there also. They did just cut Corey Coleman, so no wide receivers from the Bills. And for the Ravens, I would start Michael Crabtree. I think he could get low-end wide receiver 2 or high-end wide receiver 3 value this week as the Ravens are going to throw the ball a little bit against the Bills. He could get some third down work and help him get some first downs. And John Brown, he can take the top off the field. He's got amazing speed, but I don't foresee him as anything more than wide receiver 4 this week because I have a lot of other guys higher. There's 16 games. There's a lot of wide receivers out there. So he could break into the wide receiver 3 range in really deep leagues, 16-team leagues. But as far as the standard 12 teams, I don't have him as a wide receiver 3 at this moment. Tight ends. The Ravens really don't have a tight end that, Hayden Hurst just got hurt. They have Mark Andrews, Max Williams still there, but nobody that's relevant for fantasy purposes. And Charles Clay for the Buffalo Bills, I have him outside my top 16 for tight ends. Although Peterman and if Josh Allen does make it into the game for one reason or another, they're going to look to check down to the tight end. He's going to be the safety blanket. He's been there for years. He knows that offense very well. But I still have him outside my top 16. Defenses, like I said, the Ravens are my number 1 defense. They're my lock of the week if you're playing with us in Pick'em or Eliminator. And the Buffalo Bills defense, I don't foresee them anything inside of the 16-team league being a viable defense. They're somewhere around the 18 range for me right now this week. And kickers, if you have them, you're starting them. Justin Tucker is absolute stud. He's going to be a top 5 kicker again this year, I'm assuming. So Justin Tucker, you're starting for sure. Steven Hauschka, That Bills offense had some trouble getting into the end zone, but they were able to move the ball slightly last year. So Hauschka had a lot of points based on that fact alone. He kicked a lot of field goals. So if you have Hauschka on your team, you're probably starting him.
All right. Get to our next game. So looking at the Chiefs and the Chargers, let's start with the quarterbacks there. So Philip Rivers, I actually like Philip Rivers. He's a guy that's not an exciting pick, but he's just steady and you're a consistent guy that you can trust. So for me, he's not top 12, but he's definitely right there at that range where you're in a 12-team league or a 16-team league in that range. He's a guy that I definitely would start this week. Now, Pat Mahomes is a guy that people are very excited about. Guy's got a strong arm. He's very talented. But I want to put the brakes on him a little bit there. He had made some mistakes in the preseason. He has had his struggles. There's a learning curve to be a quarterback. And last year, yes, he was a rookie last year, but really he didn't play. So in essence, this is kind of like his rookie year for him there. So for me, I like the guy. I think he's got a lot of weapons around him, but I'm going to sit Pat Mahomes week 1. I really want to see what he's going to do in game action. Plus, the Chargers defense is good.
Oh, yeah.
The Chargers defense is very good there. So I'm going to sit Mahomes. Let's get to the running backs. You got Gordon. Gordon is a must start. He's a running back 1 in there. As far as Eckler, Austin Eckler in that one, I think he's a guy who's got PPR value. But right now, until something happens to Gordon, there's an injury or something like that, I would sit him. And so Gordon is a running back 1. Eckler, I would sit. All running backs, I would sit. Let's go to Hunt. Kareem Hunt is another one that he might have a tougher matchup against the Chargers, but based on volume, the fact that he's number 1 guy there, you got to play him as a running back 1, and I would sit all the running backs for the Chiefs in this game. As far as wide receivers go, Keenan Allen, he's a great play. He's got a great matchup this week. He's a wide receiver 1. He's got even more value in PPR league. Start Allen in that one. Then you got Mike Williams. I think Mike Williams, former first-round pick, is poised to have a big year there, but I still want to see what he's going to do. Last year, had some back problems. He missed some time. He's looked better this preseason, but I still just want to see what he's going to do, what he's going to produce. So for me, he's a wide receiver 4 this week. I just don't have confidence to start in this first week until I see what he does. As far as the wide receivers for Kansas City, you've got Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill and Pat Mahomes, that's his favorite guy there. The problem with it is he's going to have a tough matchup week 1 against a very, very good cornerback there. But you still got to start Tyreek Hill. He's going to be a late wide receiver 1 or an early wide receiver 2 in terms of that there. So I would start him, but you may want to temper your expectations this first week. Then you look at Sammy Watkins, who was brought in, given a lot of money. People thought he was going to have a big year. I thought that he might rebound this year, but right now it hasn't looked great. The reports out of camp are he hasn't impressed. So for me, Watkins is actually a wide receiver 4 this week. I'm just going to stay away from him. Then you look at all their wide receivers, I would probably sit in that one. As far as tight ends go, looks like they brought Antonio Gates back there. They're looking for an option. They haven't found one yet. Gates just getting back to camp. He might see some looks in the red zone, but I wouldn't start any tight ends for the Chargers right now, not week 1. And then as far as Travis Kelce goes, you got to start Travis Kelce. Besides Gronkowski, he's the best tight end out there in football. Start him. As far as the kickers go, I would start both kickers in this game. And as far as defenses go, I would start the Chargers defense for sure, especially against Pat Mahomes, a young quarterback that can make some mistakes. But I would sit I would sit the Chiefs defense in this one. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that sounds good.
That takes us to Seattle and the Broncos.
Yeah, we have Seattle Seahawks. Quarterback Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson. Definitely going to start Russell Wilson this week. He's going to be a volume play. He's going to be scrambling all over the field. He's going to need to do some rushing. He's averaging 500-600 rushing yards per season over the last couple of years because he just absolutely has to do it. And rushing equals fantasy points. So last year he actually accounted for 37 out of the total offensive 38 touchdowns that the Seahawks had. So they only had one other touchdown other than something that Russell Wilson had either thrown for or rushed for himself. So he's going to be a big time volume play for them this year. And he's going to be looking to try and get the ball to some of those wide receivers. But the problem is we have some injuries. So we'll get to that here in a second. Russell Wilson's definitely a top 10 play for me this week. And playing against that Denver defense. On the Denver side, Case Keenum. A lot of people are excited about Case Keenum over there. They say that this offense could look a lot like the Minnesota offense, but I don't feel like he has the offensive line, and he might have the same weapons. They're a little bit older than Thielen and Diggs, but Manuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas are solid options, and Cortland Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton are coming up here as rookies. So unfortunately this week we're not going to be starting Case Keenum. He's outside my top 20 for quarterbacks, unless you're in a two quarterback league, you're probably not starting Case Keenum, but you will be starting Russell Wilson, hopefully. On to the running backs, Chris Carson. Chris Carson is the starter there right now. Rashad Penny had that finger issue, but he wasn't looking so great in the preseason to begin with. So Carson had just overtaken that job to himself, basically took it back because he was a starter last year and had that fibula break. But Carson's back now. He's got the job. As far as this week goes, that Denver Broncos defense, that front seven is going to be tough this year. So I have Carson as a fringe RB2, kind of a flex RB in that 20 to 30 range for this week, just because that Broncos front seven is going to be tough, and I don't really know how the offensive line is going to look for the Seahawks in game action. So I'm going to kind of temper my expectations there with Chris Carson, but I do look forward to seeing what he does through season long. And we're not starting Penny at all this week, and hopefully he comes back healthy and can get some work. But we'll figure that out. Come to that when it happens. As far as the Denver Broncos, Royce Freeman's named the unequivocal starter there as the number one guy. Devontae Booker just can't seem to shake the issues that he's had. So every time they bring in another running back, Booker just gets beat out for the job, and Royce Freeman looked very good in the preseason. He's actually an RB2 for me this week in standard and PPR leagues. He's got a lot of potential to catch the ball out of the backfield, and he's also a very good rusher there. Phillip Lindsay's actually looking pretty good, so if anything were to happen to Freeman, I'd be looking at Phillip Lindsay. But as for this week, we're only starting Royce Freeman as far as the running backs for the Broncos. On to the wide receivers, like I mentioned, Doug Baldwin having some issues with that knee. He did say that he's coming to practice this week. He's going to start week 1, but he's going to be watching his knee and managing things throughout the season. So don't be surprised if he's questionable a lot of weeks, if he maybe takes a veteran day off during practice week but ends up starting on the weekends. You just want to watch that tag. I know 10:30 a.m. Central Time on Sundays is when they release the inactives and actives for the week. So as far as right now, I do have Doug Baldwin as a wide receiver 2 for me this week, and he says he will be playing. So that is what I'm looking at there. Any other guys on the Seattle wide receivers I don't want to be starting this week? We have Jerron Brown and Tyler Lockett. I'm going to wait and see on Tyler Lockett, but I'm definitely not starting him for week 1. Excuse me. And for the Denver Broncos, Demaryius Thomas, I actually have him as a wide receiver 2 this week. And Emmanuel Sanders, I really, really like him this year. He's one of the guys I'm actually kind of all in on, along with Chris Hogan. He's going to see a lot of work out of the slot, which they're going to run a lot of 11 personnel with 1 running back, 1 tight end. So that leaves a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, which gets Cortland Sutton on the field. But as far as week 1 goes, I have Emmanuel Sanders wide receiver 3 and Demaryius Thomas as a wide receiver 2, and Cortland Sutton will be on the field, but I do not foresee him as a fantasy option. So starting Thomas and Sanders, but not Sutton. And when it comes to the tight ends, we're not starting either of the tight ends for the Seattle Seahawks with Nick Vannett or Ed Dickson, and also I'm not starting Jake Butt for the Denver Broncos because we just don't know with him yet. He missed his whole rookie season last year, and he's just getting healthy now, so we just don't know what's going on. So I will not start either one of the team's tight ends for this week. And defenses, I do have Denver as a top 10 defense this week. They're low end top 10, so if you're in a 10-team league, you want to be looking at them as a fringe. 12, 14, and 16-team leagues, you're probably going to start the Broncos defense if you have them. And Seattle's defense, I'm not starting this week. And kickers, McManus is a decent option to kick for Denver, but I don't have Janikowski as a starting kicker for this week.
All right, sounds good. Let's get to the next game. So again, the Redskins and the Cardinals. Let's look at Alex Smith and Sam Bradford. Both quarterbacks are very efficient. They're known for throwing high percentage passes. I think Smith is a better play than Bradford, but I think neither are great starts unless you're in a league that has to start 2 quarterbacks. Adrian Peterson. So he's playing the Cardinals, who last year allowed only 89 rushing yards per game. Now last season, Adrian Peterson, I know a lot of you guys are excited about him, but I want to temper your expectations. So last year, Adrian, against 2 weak rush defenses, Tampa Bay and San Francisco had huge games. He had one game where he had 134 yards. Another game we had 158 yards with a 4.65 yards per carry. The other 8 games, he had a total of 182 yards on 93 carries of 1.96 yards per carry. You got to look at Adrian Peterson because he's the starter there and he's going to get carries. So he's a guy that you definitely need to consider. But don't think he's going to be the Adrian Peterson of 4, 5, 6 years ago. It's just not going to happen. So going into this week, tough matchup. I got Adrian as a running back 3 or a flex play in 12-team leagues or higher. As far as David Johnson goes, you need to start him in all formats, all leagues, no matter size. David Johnson is the guy that you're going to go with. And then Chris Thompson. Chris Thompson sounds like he's recovered, ready to roll. Last year, he's having a great year before he broke his leg. He's a running back 3 or a flex play and PPR leagues only. And then all the other running backs, I wouldn't bother even considering starting any of them unless between now when we do the video and the start of the season somebody gets injured and maybe it changes kind of some of those starting opportunities there. Otherwise, I won't start any of them. As far as wide receiver goes, Larry Fitzgerald has averaged 108 catches the last 3 years. He's a great wide receiver, future Hall of Famer. Love the guy. He's a wide receiver 2 in PPR leagues this week. In standards, he drops to a wide receiver 3. Christian Kirk, another guy I love out there. I think this guy's got a lot of potential. He's a huge sleeper. They're comparing him to Odell Beckham, but I would still wait and see. I wouldn't start him until he sees some regular season action, unless you're desperate. But once again, I would advise you to sit Christian Kirk. I definitely would tell you to pick him up and put him on your bench, but you can't trust the guy week 1. Josh Doxson's another wide receiver that has sleeper potential, but he's not ready to be a fantasy starter yet. You got to wait and see with him. Now, of all the wide receivers on Washington, probably the one that you could start and feel the most comfortable with would be Jamison Crowder. He's probably the safest play for them. In PPR leagues as a slot receiver, as a wide receiver 3, I would sit him in standard leagues. And there's Paul Richardson there, and a lot of people are speculating what his role is going to be there. For me, I've got a little more caution with him there. Obviously, him as a wide receiver 4. I think he'll have similar statistics he did in Seattle. He'll have a couple big games, but for the most part, he's nothing more for me than an occasional start and based on matchup. Now, that could change over time, but I need a prove-it game to show me otherwise. As far as tight ends go, Jordan Reed, it's never been a question for talent with him. It's staying healthy. Can the guy be healthy? Well, right now, sounds like he's going to play week 1. So he's going to play week 1. I've got him as a tight end 1 in that matchup. And you have Ricky Seals-Jones for the Cardinals, some other tight ends there. Jones was a converted wide receiver to tight end. He's got a lot of potential, but you need to skip start in week 1. You don't start a guy based on what ifs. Then the kickers, you got Hopkins and Dawson. Neither are great plays, but both are safe plays if you want to go with that. As far as defenses go, the Cardinals are a better start. Neither of them are good because these are veteran quarterbacks that are not going to turn the ball over a lot. And so I would probably sit both of these defenses unless you have no other option. The best one to start out of those two would probably be the Cardinals. That's my take on that game. Now we've got up the Cowboys versus the Panthers.
All right, for the Dallas Cowboys, we have Dak Prescott at quarterback. And the thing with Dak Prescott is he's been absolutely amazing when he's got Tyron Smith and Ezekiel Elliott on the field. When he loses Ezekiel Elliott, he actually averages more interceptions than he does touchdowns. And with Tyron Smith last year, he missed those 4 games. Prescott had 1 touchdown to 5 interceptions. And in all the games that Smith was in, he had 21 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. So just a little bit of an inefficiency breakdown for when he's losing these other guys, but he's got both of those guys back this year. He should be a decent play. He does score a lot of points on the ground. Last year, 27% of his fantasy points were scored with his legs versus the league average of 13.5, which is twice as much as the league average. So the problem he has is his wide receivers, and we don't really know who's going to be the clear number 1 there. But Dak Prescott, I see him outside my top 14. If you're in a 16-team league, he's right on the bubble for me. But 2 quarterback leagues, you're definitely going to start him. Hopefully he gets some points on the ground with his legs, but Zeke's going to be the one there getting a lot of the ground points. So Dak Prescott, I would start in maybe a 2 quarterback league or fringe on the 16-team league, but otherwise we're sitting Dak Prescott. Cam Newton, on the other hand, is a definite start this week. He's going to be a top 10 play for a quarterback. He does it all. He's got the legs. He's got the passing ability, although he doesn't get a lot of yards per game. So if you're in a league where you get bonuses for over 300, you're not going to see that from Cam a lot. But he makes up for it with his rushing ability, his red zone threat to score touchdowns, and the fact that he's always getting yards on the ground. On to the running backs. Excuse me. Ezekiel Elliott, he's going to be a top 5 play for most weeks this year. He's a no-brainer start. There's no other running backs we really need to worry about at this point in Dallas. And Christian McCaffrey for the Carolina Panthers. He's going to be a top 10 PPR play. He might move around to the 12 range in standard, but they're talking about getting him the ball as much as possible. Now, we talked about coach speak earlier. Sometimes the coaches don't realize how many plays per game they actually get, so I don't know how you're going to get a running back 30 touches when you only get 60 plays, but he's still going to see an uptick in plays from last year, and last year he finished as running back 9 or 10 in PPR, so he'll actually should increase his value this year. He's a definite start for me. CJ Anderson's one other guy you want to look at here. I don't have CJ Anderson in my running back 3 range. He's more of a low-end RB4. He might vulture a touchdown or two, but you're not going to have him in your starting lineup anyways. So, if you're absolutely desperate, that would be the only option there for CJ Anderson. As far as wide receivers go, for the Dallas Cowboys, like I said, we don't really know who the number one's going to be. They brought in Allen Hurns, they gave him a good contract, but they also drafted Michael Gallup, and he is slotted to take kind of a Des Bryant role, but we haven't really seen it yet. He did have one nice catch for a touchdown from Dak in a preseason game, but as of right now, he's kind of a wait-and-see mode, so I'm not starting any of these wide receivers from Dallas. You got Terrence Williams there, Cole Beasley, Allen Hurns, and Michael Gallup, but none of these guys are a viable starter for me this week. And for the Carolina Panthers, I'd start Devin Funchess as a wide receiver 3. DJ Moore is another guy, kind of like Christian Kirk you mentioned, is he's absolutely a talented guy. I'm really excited about him this year. But at this point, we still need to see what his role is going to be. So we're going to wait and see on DJ Moore, but we're starting Devin Funchess, and there's really nobody else as far as the wide receivers go for the Panthers that we're going to be too concerned with at this point for week 1. Now with the tight end situation in Dallas, looks to be Rico Gathers. It could be Blake Jarwin, but either way, we're not starting either one of these guys at this point for the Cowboys. However, we do go to the Panthers, and we're going to be starting Greg Olsen as a top 10 fantasy option. He's always in the red zone. He has a nose for the end zone, and Cam Newton loves to throw to him. And I think Norv Turner is going to be looked to get Cam a lot of confident, high percentage passes, and Greg Olsen is one of those guys that's always wide open over the middle that Cam can seem to find. So Olsen's a good play for this week. And defenses, I have Carolina in the fringe on a 12-team league. I would probably start them in a 12, 14, or 16-team league, 10-team leagues. It's kind of your option depending on where you drafted them, because a lot of people probably aren't drafting 2 defenses. I'm not starting the Cowboys defense. I'm not starting their new kicker now that they dropped Dan Bailey, second most accurate kicker in the NFL history. He actually is working out with the Jets this week. But I'm not starting the kicker for Dallas. And Graham Gano, if you drafted him, you would definitely start him. So that's the kicker's options there.
All right, sounds good. So we got the Bears versus the Packers. So Aaron Rodgers, just start him. Okay, don't even think about it. Just start Aaron Rodgers. Mitch Trubisky, I would sit him. He struggled last year. He didn't look great in the preseason. Now I think a lot of you are thinking about Jared Goff, how he turned it around in 1 year. One much different situation, different coach and weapons around him. You need to lower your expectation. Plus, that offense went from first to worst. That is not normative. That just doesn't happen. So I would stay away from Mitch Trubisky until we see how that offense does with Coach Nagy the week 1 here. So. Running backs, Ty Montgomery. I think Ty this year is going to have like a hybrid role. He used a lot in the passing game with a few carries, but I wouldn't start him week 1. And Jamal Williams with Aaron Jones out. I like Aaron Jones, but with him out, Jamal Williams is a guy that you're going to start. In PPR leagues, he's a running back too. Now he's going to struggle to run the ball all year. He did last year. He has in the preseason, but he's got good hands, and so that elevates his value in PPR leagues and standard leagues this week. Jamal is a running back 3. Jordan Howard is a start as a running back 2 in standards. He's a running back 2/3 in PPR. He's losing a little bit of value there, but they're going to rely heavily on this guy all year. The one thing I think Chicago's want to do is avoid a shootout there, so I think they're going to try to run the ball if they can establish that. Last year, though, against the Packers, they were able to bottle them up quite a bit. Hopefully, Coach Nagy can fix that. And then you got Tariq Cohen. He only has PPR value as a running back 3, a flex play in deep, and I say that deep leagues only. As far as wide receivers go, you got Allen Robinson out there. He was signed to be the team's stud wide receiver, the number 1 guy. Didn't show a lot in the preseason. They sat a lot of their starters. They didn't get a lot of time there, so I'm not really sure how that's going to work out. Yet he is the number 1 guy. They are going to need to play catch up, so to me, he's a wide receiver 2 this week. Then you got Anthony Miller. Anthony Miller has had glowing reports out of camp. I think that he's going to do well this year, but I think he's a rookie. He's unproven, and you have Mitch Trubisky there. So don't get too hyped on this guy. For me this week, he's a wide receiver 4. I would sit him. Devontae Adams is set for a huge year as a wide receiver 1. Have fun with him all year. Start this guy. Then you got Randall Cobb, who's going to be the Packers' number 2 guy. And number 2 guys in that offense have done pretty well. I would say Cobb this week is a wide receiver 3, depending on your league size. If you're in a smaller league, maybe not, but if you're in 12-team leagues or larger, he is a wide receiver 3. You got Tyler Gabriel, White, Allison Geronimo, and those all their wide receivers. I would just sit in that game. As far as tight ends go, you got Jimmy Graham. Doesn't matter what league you're in, you're going to start him. I think he's got more value in standards, but he's still a guy that you're going to start. And then you got Trey Burton. He's really a sleeper this year. And he showed good rapport with Mitch Trubisky earlier in preseason, so he's a guy that you need to start. They are going to be playing probably catch up in this one. As far as kickers go, I would start Mason Crosby. And Cody Parker is not a bad start. He's not a great play, but you could certainly start him. As far as defenses go, I would start Green Bay. Now, Chicago, I think, is going to be a phenomenal defense this year, especially now they picked up Khalil Mack. The problem with it is Khalil Mack hasn't been there. He hasn't been in camp. He's probably not in game shape. There's things that he needs to do before he can really flow with that defense. So I think it's going to take a few weeks there. Plus, there's some other guys that are injured on the Bears right now. I think Floyd is banged up. So I like Chicago, but I don't like them this week as a start. So that's my take on that game.
Absolutely.
So, Ron, I think you're up for your final game.
Yeah, we're on to Monday Night Football. We have the New York Jets at the Detroit Lions, Ford Field. Start off with the quarterbacks. As we know, the Jets, week 1, starting Sam Darnold over Josh McCown. They traded away Bridgewater. I'm not going to be starting Sam Darnold. And in the preseason, it looked like Todd Bowles gave him a lot of short, quick, confident throws. He had a high percentage, but he was not throwing for a lot of yardage. He didn't throw for a lot of touchdowns. And he's a rookie, so they're going to give him those confident throws. He's going to toss to the backfield. He's going to toss to the tight end and his slot receivers. But I don't foresee him being a top 20 play for this week. And that Detroit Lions defense is actually slightly better than advertised. So watch out for them in the future this year. But I'm not starting Sam Darnold. I will be starting Matthew Stafford, however. I actually have him as a top 10 play as well. And Stafford is absolutely phenomenal, especially with the weapons he has around him. They do love to throw the ball there. They are one of the top 6 teams as far as pass attempts over the last 3 years. So they throw the ball quite a bit there in Detroit. So I will be starting Stafford. High volume and usually gets a lot of yardage and definitely some touchdowns. Moving on to the running backs. Isaiah Crowell and Bilal Powell for the Jets. The thing with Crowell, I have him as a RB3 this week, low-end RB3. It's going to be a volume play, but Bilal Powell is there. And one of the things with Powell is actually he's a very efficient running back. They just never give him the opportunity. And 2 years ago, towards the end of the year, he had that opportunity all to himself, and he was RB8 over the last 6 weeks of the season. And then last year they bring in, Matt Forte, and this year they bring in Isaiah Crowell. They just do not want to give Powell the opportunity. So Powell's going to be a sit for me this week. He's actually an RB3, RB4 range, but Crowell is a start in deeper leagues and leagues where you would have a flex position right around the 30 range for me. As far as the Lions, I actually have Kerryon Johnson ahead of LeGarrette Blount this week. I know in the preseason he did show some flashes, but at the same time he did show some inefficiencies. But both of those guys, they're going to be sits for me. And I'm not starting Theo Riddick in any type of league. So all of the guys are going to be sits for the Detroit Lions, but I do have Kerryon Johnson a little bit higher than LeGarrette Blount for this week. I like his potential, and over the course of the season, he's going to be higher for me. When it comes to the wide receivers, Robbie Anderson's the only guy that we're really going to talk about relevancy in the New York Jets offense. It's kind of another one of those things. It's a volume play. They're probably going to be coming from behind. Detroit's going to be up on them most likely, and they're going to need to throw the ball. They have Robbie Anderson. Quincy Enunwa is a guy that we want to watch out for, but we're not starting him this week. Terrell Pryor, until I see it from him, I'm not going to be starting him, and I probably won't have him in a lot of my leagues. So Robbie Anderson is a wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 possibility, depending on how much volume he actually does get. It will be a start for me. And when it comes to the Lions, I have Golden Tate and Marvin Jones both in wide receiver 2 territory, especially in PPR leagues, because those guys are absolutely phenomenal. And when on the field with Kenny Golladay, all three of those guys can take defenses' attention away and get separation and get one-on-one matchups for the other one by just drawing attention. So Jones and Tate are wide receiver 2 for me this week, and Golladay is actually low-end wide receiver 4. Until something else happens and he moves up the depth chart, or one of those other 2 guys gets hurt, I just foresee him as a lower wide receiver 4 option. Tight ends, I'm not starting any of the tight ends from the Jets. I'm not starting Luke Wilson for the Detroit Lions. Stafford loves to go to the receivers, and he'll check down to the running backs every once in a while. They don't really throw to the tight ends very frequently. And when it comes to defenses, like I mentioned earlier, the Detroit Lions defense is a little bit better than advertised. I have them way down on the deep sleeper list, right around 14 for defenses this week. So if you're in a 16-team league, I would go with them. 12-team league, I would say probably not, but in a 14-team league, you're taking the Lions defense for this week. You're probably streaming throughout the season, and the Jets is not a starting defense for me. And as far as kickers go, the Jets, like I said, are trying out Dan Bailey, so we'll see what happens there. But this week, if you have the Jets kicker on your team, then you're probably starting him, and you're definitely starting Matt Prater for the Lions. He's been absolutely phenomenal. He kicks a lot of long field goals, and he's always within the top 10 of kickers at the end of the season.
All right, sounds good. Let's get to our final game. The Rams versus the Raiders. So let's start with Derek Carr there. I like Derek Carr. I think he's going to rebound year, although this week he's not top 10. You could start him. I would say that if you're in a 12-team league or larger, may not be a bad play, but he does have a decent or a tough matchup against the Rams defense that should be good this year. Jared Goff last year was very good against bad defenses, but he was average at best against good defenses. Now without Mack in this one, Oakland's defense is probably going to have a very bad year, so I would start Jared Goff. As far as the running backs go, Todd Gurley, start. Really nothing to say there. You got to start him. I would sit all of the Rams backs unless there's a major injury there. None of them have value. Marshawn Lynch is a running back 3 this week. If you look at last year, he started slow, but as the year went on, he got stronger and stronger. So I think he's the guy there that you want to look at. All of the running backs, you got Washington, Richard, Martin. None of those guys have value unless something major happens there, ineffectiveness, injuries, things like that. As far as wide receiver go, I look at Amari Cooper. I would start as a wide receiver 2 this week. I actually like Amari Cooper to have a comeback this year, to rebound, have a big year, but he faces Aqib Talib, which brings down his value slightly. Jordy Nelson, reports are he's faster, he's healed, he's beating coverage, he looks good again, looks like his old self. And so I would say this week he's a wide receiver 3 in leagues that are 12 teams or larger. Now here's where it gets tough. If you're looking at Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, or Cooper Kupp. Let's start with Brandon Cooks. Signed a big deal. He's had 3 consecutive years of 1,000 yards. He has proven himself. He's been very effective. You got Robert Woods. At one point last year, he was Jared Goff's favorite receiver. He was getting targets. He was tearing it up. And then he gets injured. Then, of course, you got Cooper Kupp. Cooper had a very good rookie season, and this year out of Rams camp, reports are that him and Jared Goff have this great chemistry and that he's Goff's favorite target and that he's unstoppable. Well, all 3 of those guys have appeal there. I would say all 3 of those guys probably fall for me what I would say wide receiver 3 appeal. Honestly, the best thing that could happen is one of those guys getting hurt now. Right. Like, that's a problem for me. I like all 3 of those guys. I don't like the fact there's a lot of mouths to feed there. They devalue each other. So I think we'd start all 3 of those guys, but as a wide receiver 3, the guy that I'm least excited about is Robert Woods in that. As far as tight ends go, you got Jared Cook. He's a tight end I've ranked between the 14 to 18 range. You could start in deep leagues. Otherwise, I would sit. Everett, Higbee, I would sit both of those guys. As far as kickers go, Greg Zuerlein. Last year, he missed 2 games, still led all kickers in points. You got to start him. And Nick Nugent's a nice play. He's not a great start, but he's a safe play there for Oakland. I would sit Oakland's defense, and I would start the Rams defense this week. So there's our breakdown for you guys. I wish we had got more in depth. I wish we could give you more stats and numbers, but if we did, this video would have been 3 hours long. So if you have any questions, we'll get more in depth there on the answer in the Q&A.
Well, it was a learning process for me. This is my first week doing this with you, so we talked about trying to kind of limit the games to a certain amount of time and cutting down on some things. But we're gonna definitely you want comments? We'll get in depth in the comments, and we have a lot more numbers. And we could have went on forever, like Rob said. So we'll try and get it figured out and keep it shorter next time. Like, I'm long-winded, you can tell.
All right, thanks for joining us here at FFP. God bless, take care, and see you soon.